creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and we're going to spend some time today, first of all, kind of looking back to some of the comments being made about the decision by the current president, Joe Biden, to pardon his son, and some of the reactions there. And then we're going to spend some time, since it is the season of Advent, to actually welcome to the microphone Geoffrey Chang, who has edited together some great illustrations and messages and even sermons from Charles Spurgeon. I think you'll really appreciate that. We'll also be talking a little bit later in the next hour with Mark Gerson about African mission healthcare. And then we'll come back to some other issues, some comments about what is happening in terms of the cabinet, some questions about this administrative state and whether or not DOGE, the Department of Efficiency, Government Efficiency, will be effective in cutting that down, and some interesting comments from Elon Musk, of all people, as to why there has been such a flap over the choice of an individual who will serve as the director of the FBI. So we'll get into all of those as time goes on. But if you have been paying attention, you probably know that over the last couple of days, we've been talking about the idea that today is Giving Tuesday. If you receive an email from me, you probably received some yesterday, probably received one today, and I thought it would be good for just a few minutes to explain why we're doing what we're doing. So we bring into the microphone here and into the studio the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly.
Thank you, Kerby. It's always a privilege to be in here with you.
Well, let's, if we can, talk about Giving Tuesday. It, of course, is an opportunity for people to give to a number of different ministries. Right. As I've said before, I hope that you not only support Point of View, but even support the radio stations that carry this program.
Yes.
This next year in 2025, I'm doing at least 2 different banquets, and maybe even more to come, with various radio stations where I want to help them raise their support, because I think it is so important. It is a partnership we have with them. But when people give to Point of View, they might say, okay, I know you do a radio program. Can you give us the full-orbed look at what Point of View is about?
I can do that. Point of View is a radio program primarily, and you know that because you're listening to us probably on the radio. So we have about 212 radio stations across the country that carry the broadcast, and Point of View's been on the air for like over 50 years. And during that time, God has used this program to shape the lives and the worldview of literally tens of millions of listeners. So your gifts really do make a difference. You're the one that makes that possible. But in addition to the radio broadcast, Kerby, you know that we have an audio podcast, we have a video podcast, we have an audio stream, we have a video stream, we have other digital resources. And because of that, that makes the program available in parts of the country where there are no radio stations. So it fills in those different places, but also it makes it available around the world. Point of View now has listeners in virtually every country of the world.
Just amazing.
And it's making a big difference in the lives of people. We got a nice letter from a gentleman in South Africa the other day talking about how he has been listening for years and how it has really impacted his life and made a difference. But some of you probably don't know that Kerby also adds to our website at least half a dozen articles every single day. So you have resources on a wide variety of topics. If you go to pointofview.net, go to the search engine, you type in whatever it is you want to know about, I will guarantee you that Kerby has put something up there that will be a great, reliable resource for you that will help you understand that topic. But even beyond that, those of you who are monthly partners or regular donors to Point of View, you know that we put out that booklet every month. Kerby does a fantastic job with these. We get so many compliments talking about how in 10 minutes or less, you can read one of the booklets and you can have a solid understanding on that topic, whatever it is. And there's a huge range of topics that he does that. And people hold on to those booklets and they go back to them and they use them as a resource when they need to know that, remind themselves about that topic. But a lot of people give them away as well. In fact, I had a call from a listener who's been a listener for many years. He said, Warren, I have a friend who's an atheist, but he lives in Australia. And I want to get him a copy of Kerby's book on biblical reliability, because that book really helps people understand that the Bible really is true. It is reliable. It's not just myths and fables, that kind of thing. So we helped him get a copy of the booklet to his friend in Australia. So those things make a difference. And then you have the Outlet magazine that comes out every month. And there are other resources that we send out. Literally could sit here all day talking about how many things that Point of View does to impact the lives of hundreds of thousands of people across the country and around the world every single day. And that's what you do when you give to Point of View. You are impacting the lives of people across the country, around the world, literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of those people. So today is Giving Tuesday. Today is a great opportunity for you to give. We have a $15,000 goal for today. We're about a third of the way there. So we have a little ways to go and could really use your help. So please let us hear from you. And this is an opportunity for you to make a difference in our culture and in our world.
That I might also mention, too, that sometimes I get the question, well, Kerby, you ever going to retire? Not that they're trying to retire me anytime soon, but I say, well, just look at the fact that, we have the Know Why podcast that Liberty McCarter does. This Thursday, people will be able to hear the Millennial Roundtable. And again, we have individuals that are, I'm guess the oldest one around here, but the youngest one's on the other side of the glass. And we have that plan for what the future is. So some people might say, well, what is the future of Point of View? And you and I recognize we won't always be here. And of course, Marlon Maddox wasn't always here. And here we continue on.
Yeah, there was a time when Marlon told me that he didn't think that Point of View could last more than a month or two after he passed away because, there just wasn't anybody to pick up the gauntlet. And here Kerby's been sitting in that chair, I think now longer than Marlon did. Mm-hmm. And the program is still every bit as strong today as it was back in the day when Marlon was here. And we do have plans that are going to continue this, but let me interject. Kerby's not going anywhere. He is not planning on retiring. Kerby is 10 years older than I am and runs circles around me with his schedule and everything he does. One of the most healthy people that I know. So he's not going anywhere. His mind is still just as sharp as it was 20, 30 years ago doing the show. So don't worry about that. But the Point of View that you have known and loved is going to continue to be here for many, many years to come.
Let me just mention that I do have a link to the website, which is in the email that we sent to you. There's a banner that says today is Giving Tuesday, but I believe you have some people that are willing to answer the phones, too.
We do.
So, again, let's give that number out, and that is a different number than the on-air number. It's 800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. Someone might actually answer that, and if it gets really busy, just hold on, and somebody will get to you right away. But I just think that Giving Tuesday is an opportunity to say, I support this ministry, and I thought maybe by the end of the program, bring you in again, you can tell us how we've been doing. But I thought we'd start off by mentioning that we're going to be getting into all sorts of issues in the news, but it is Giving Tuesday. Support any ministry that you believe in, but I hope one of those ministries would be Point of View, because we want to be your trusted source for news, information, and commentary. If you appreciate the guests we bring together every single day, we certainly would appreciate your gift right now. You can call that number at 800-347-5151. Of course, you can go to pointofview.net. There's a banner that says Today is Giving Tuesday. Let's take a break. We'll come back with Warren Kelly at the end of the program. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As we all know, the country is carrying a national debt of $36 trillion. The Bible warns us about debt. Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a servant to the lender." We need to do something rather than ignoring our debt problem. Senator Cynthia Lummis has proposed that the U.S. put together a Bitcoin strategic reserve. She has introduced the Bitcoin Act in the last session of Congress and will reintroduce it again in January. This next time, it may get a hearing because of the change in the U.S. Senate and the interest from the new Trump administration. Now, she proposes that the U.S. keep the Bitcoin that they have recovered and purchase approximately 200,000 Bitcoin a year. She predicts just by converting money we already have into Bitcoin and holding them for 20 years, if we do that with 5% of the Bitcoin that ever existed, which is roughly 1 million Bitcoin, we could cut our debt in half in 20 years. The other benefit, she explains, we would have an asset that's growing in value while our own dollar is decreasing in value. We could shore up the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. This, she believes, would help protect the country against inflation and protect the U.S. dollar worldwide. Her proposal will have its critics, as illustrated by one article with the title, "The Delusions Behind the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve." But the idea deserves an honest discussion and evaluation in Congress. And perhaps you've seen the graph that illustrates that it took 221 years to reach a national debt of $12 trillion, and then shows that we've added $12 trillion since 2020. We have a debt problem, and this is one way to address it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Point of View, finding clarity in the chaos.
Point of view is important, it's entertaining, it's vibrant. I hope that folks who listen already know that, and I'm just here to remind them that they should think about supporting it, even in a modest way, maybe especially in a modest way, whatever you feel is appropriate. But I think this is an important ministry, and I would just encourage you to step up to the plate. They need your help. And please be encouraged that God loves a cheerful giver. Amen.
Finding clarity in the chaos. Point of View.
Eric Metaxas, good friend, an individual that we started interviewing on Point of View before he had all those best-selling books like Amazing Grace and Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther and others. And so, again, encouraging you to give to this ministry. And if you can do so, it is Giving Tuesday. Let's get into some of the issues in the news. Of course, we talked yesterday about the pardon of President Biden giving to his son. And there are just a couple of other kind of reactions, one of which is the reactions among Democrats who in some cases have said, Mr. President, it's almost like you're trying to destroy your legacy and you're trying to destroy the Democratic Party. Let me just give you one quote. This comes from the Colorado governor. He's a Democrat, Jared Polis, who said, "While as a father I certainly understand President Joe Biden's natural desire to help his son by pardoning him, I am disappointed that he put his family ahead of the country." He says this is a bad precedent that could be abused by later presidents. That's something that I think you already are hearing many of them say, and will sadly tarnish his reputation. The governor of, again, Colorado goes on to say, when you become president, your role is paterfamilias, it's Latin, of the nation, and Hunter brought the legal trouble he faced on himself, and one can sympathize with his struggles while also acknowledging that no one is above the law, not a president and not a president's son. And that's, I think, a key key illustration there of the fact that for months we have heard, when especially there was what I think was lawfare against Donald Trump, the line that was used constantly was simply, well, no one is above the law, not the president, not the president's son or anything else. And yet here we see that particular pardon being given out. And so it is certainly one thing that is going to maybe affect the legacy of Joe Biden. But it's interesting, I've seen numerous articles that have come out from a variety of different sources, all saying it's sure going to make it much easier now for Donald Trump to actually pardon the January 6 protesters and hostages, as he calls it. If you go to Donald Trump's post on Truth Social, this is how he said it: does the pardon given by Joe to Hunter include the J6 hostages who have now been imprisoned for years, such an abuse and miscarriage of justice? Lots of people have picked up on that theme. Let me just give you two. One is Will Chamberlain, who said President Trump should just copy and paste this sentence. That is the sentence in the actual pardon that Joe Biden gave to Hunter Biden into every one of his pardons of the J6 defendants, including grandmas convicted of praying in front of abortion clinics and others as well. And so that, as I mentioned yesterday, probably will take place. There are a couple of individuals that many people believe that Donald Trump probably will pardon. I talked about those yesterday, and you can go through and see the list that I created. It's a pretty short list because, as I also pointed out, for some of you that will say, well, Trump does it, Biden does it, everybody does it. No, if you go back and look, in the modern era, the person who has pardoned the fewest was George Herbert Walker Bush. Number two, right next to him, was Donald Trump. The pardons that were given by, say, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, and now, of course, Joe Biden, have been extensive. And many times there are people that do have criminal records, and maybe you could argue in a few cases their punishment exceeded their crime, but in many cases we're letting people out or pardoning people that maybe shouldn't have received pardons in the first place. I've never been a fan of them. I mentioned that yesterday. I think this whole idea of being able to pardon individuals has been greatly misused and overused and abused. But nevertheless, let's get to another. And Kurt Schlichter, he's been on the program with us before. Now he says this will make it easier for Donald Trump to pardon every J6 individual, every abortion protester, and other political prisoners. So the impact that this could have might be somewhat significant. So again, just a couple of issues to mention there as well. And before we get into some other topics, which we'll probably cover on the other side, maybe in the next hour, I thought I would also point out that there are many commentators pointing out that even the election of Donald Trump, even before he's even taken office, has actually had an impact around the world. One of those examples is the posting by the president that Hamas must release the hostages, or when he takes power, there will be, and he uses some words I wouldn't use on the air, but there will be something to pay for that. And it was reminiscent of the fact that for those of you that are a little bit older, you might remember that when Americans were held hostage in Iran, when Jimmy Carter was president, as soon as Ronald Reagan was sworn into office, those hostages were put on a plane and sent back home. I think Donald Trump is hoping the same kind of thing will happen, and if not, there is going to be a price that will be paid, and ultimately you are noticing that Hamas right now is quite willing, seemingly, to engage in something that looks like negotiation. We had, of course, a ceasefire in the north. That didn't last very long. There were rockets fired both from Lebanon to Israel, and then some strikes from Israel to Lebanon. But one of the other interesting ones is, as you well know, Donald Trump, and we've mentioned this on the program, has actually said he is going to put massive tariffs on both Canada and Mexico, as well as China. I'll get to that in just a minute. And the argument is simply that Canada has not done a very good job of controlling the amount of drugs and other things that have come into this country. When the southern border was somewhat controlled, then those who wanted to make their way or sneak into this country have gone to Canada. And so as a result, some say that we are dealing with individuals who have come in from Canada to the United States from over 70 different countries around the world. So as you may know, the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, without any major announcement, showed up at Mar-a-Lago to talk with Donald Trump. And what's been so interesting is Donald Trump apparently let people know what he said, and that is Trudeau, here's one of the actual posts from someone else. Trudeau was complaining about tariffs, and Trump told him that if Canada can't survive without ripping off the United States, then Canada should become the 51st state, which I thought was kind of interesting. And for those of you looking online, you can see the kind of memes that have come out. You've got a picture here of North America, and it's all in the red, white, and blue. Or then you have another one with the flag where you have 51, and the 51st one is a maple leaf, and it's just an illustration, again, that you just never know what Donald Trump is going to say. Of course, that's not going to happen. And of course, the point he was making is you need to fix the border. If you have ever traveled from the United States into Canada, and I've done this on a number of occasions and spoken up there and been very gracious opportunities to do so, oftentimes it seems almost more difficult to get into Canada than when you come back from Canada into the United States. Now, you could say part of that problem maybe is what the United States doesn't do on our side of the border, but also what Canada needs to do on their side of the border. So you can see that even announcing that he would launch rather dramatic tariffs, 25% tariffs on Canadian goods and Mexican goods, has certainly gotten the attention of some of those individuals, both the individuals that are involved in the government to the north of us and the individuals in the government to the south of us. And just one more illustration that even before Donald Trump has taken office, a couple things are starting to change on the international scene. There's a lot more we'll talk about, but we do need to take a break. And we've waited till actually the third day in December to get into the Advent. So when we come back, going to spend some time with Dr. Geoffrey Chang, who has become quite the expert on Charles Spurgeon. And we're going to talk a little bit about his book, The Wondrous Mystery, and an opportunity to maybe get into the spirit of Advent. That's what we're going to be talking about right after these important messages.
Today is Giving Tuesday, and we would be honored to have you partner with us on this day of global generosity. Our goal is to raise $15,000 today. And to do that, we need your support. We do live in a chaotic world, and as the election results revealed, more and more Americans realize that they cannot trust the traditional voices in the mainstream media or the political parties like we used to. But Americans can trust Point of View, where we apply God's unshakable truth to the constantly changing chaos of the culture. Today, on Giving Tuesday, please partner with Point of View in a generous way and give more Americans the biblical clarity that we all need. Help us meet our goal. Visit us today online at pointofview.net. Or you can also give by picking up your phone and calling us toll-free at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
We're in the Advent season, and this is an opportunity to once again reflect on the incarnation, how the infant came from the infinite, and I think it's an incredible opportunity once again to not only consider what is happening during this Christmas season, this time of Advent, but also to listen to the words of Charles Spurgeon, individual that actually has had such a profound impact on so many individuals. Randy Alcorn, a good friend of this ministry, has said that no preacher of God's word speaks to me more powerfully than Charles Spurgeon. His are the words of an old friend, though sadly many of other friends yet don't know him. Many thanks to Geoffrey Chang for giving us Spurgeon's rich insights into Christ's incarnation. And this is basically a daily devotion that you can take. It's taken from his Christmas sermons, and it is titled A Wondrous Mystery, a daily advent of devotions, and it is edited by Geoffrey Chang, who serves as the assistant professor of historical theology, but also as the curator of the Spurgeon Library, which is located at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and that is in Kansas City. I've been there before speaking. Matter of fact, last time I was up there was during baseball season, and I was trying to get away just long enough to watch the Kansas City Royals. If I'm ever there in the fall, I want to go and see the Kansas City Chiefs. But nevertheless, that has been a wonderful seminary. I know a number of people that work there. And Dr. Geoffrey Chang, I appreciate the work that you've done over the years, not only as a professor of historical theology, but I know you're also the book review editor for the History and Historical Theology section of the Gospel Coalition. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Let's, if we can, set the scene for just a minute, because in your introduction, which I thought was so appropriate, you talk about the fact that by the time we get to the season where the Puritans were in power in England, this idea of Christmas really was waning. Matter of fact, it was being kind of pushed aside. The Puritans were very concerned for a couple of reasons. One, it was sort of tied to Roman Catholicism, because after all, Christmas is Christmas, and also that during that Christmas season, oftentimes in England, there was a fair amount of debauchery and drinking and those kinds of things. And so, interestingly enough, that was a world that existed. But then you have Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, comes out in 1843, in which I'll let you explain, in some respects, he wasn't necessarily just reflecting on Christmas in his day, but really calling for them to revive Christmas. And it's kind of in that cultural milieu that Charles Spurgeon actually began as a pastor and began to preach some of these sermons. Give us some background, if you might.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, it was, Spurgeon was a pastor there in London in the 19th century. In many ways, he grew up on the Puritans. He grew up reading their theology. He benefited from a lot of their ministries, their writings, their books. And on this point, in terms of the celebration of Christmas, he was in some ways aligned with them. He understood that Christmas is sort of a good thing to do, right? It's good for Christians to remember the incarnation, but at the same time, there's a lot of Christian freedom. It's not something that's imposed on the church. We ought not to see those traditions as being imposed to us from Scripture. So he really sought to balance that sort of aspect of Christian freedom, also with the cultural phenomenon that was arising in this day of this celebration of Christmas, the celebration of the holidays, of being with family, of gift giving. But in the midst of all that, he wanted to reinsert the theological meaning behind all those practices.
Right.
That these things, we do these things because of a belief in the incarnation of Christ.
Well, and again, you have in that same period, of course, we call it Victorian England, you have Prince Albert and Queen Victoria, but Prince Albert really brought a lot of his German Christmas traditions.
That's right.
Because in Lutheranism in Germany, that still existed. So much of what we think about today in terms of Christmas really came from him and from that tradition. Christmas trees, The idea of gift giving, candles, and those kinds of things. So in some respects, he wanted to be true to the Puritan teaching and true to biblical ideas, but also there were times when he was talking about the fact that I wish other days could be like Christmas. Didn't he say something like that?
Yeah, he said something like, I wish there were a dozen Christmases, all year long. He is especially mindful of the fact that his largely middle-class working congregation, that for many of them, this was their only holiday. So he would wish for more opportunities for these working-class people to be able to rest and be with family. Yeah, so he saw it as a good thing in society.
Well, again, as we work our way through the different devotions, you will see that oftentimes you're quoting from some of the key passages, of course, Luke 2, but even in the Old Testament, Isaiah 9, Micah 5, and other passages. So it seems to me that he provides a model for pastors right now that maybe want to talk about the hope of Christmas. They want to talk about the incarnation from the infinite to the infant. There are all sorts of great themes that really are part of some of the sermons that he gave as he was addressing that congregation. And again, I think it's worth mentioning that didn't he start preaching at the age of like 16, and he was called to be a pastor by the age of 19, and then eventually was pastoring in the largest church, evangelical church in London. So he had a phenomenal run and a great experience of really exegeting God's word for the British people at the time.
Yeah, and if you think about London in the 19th century, this is at the height of the British Empire.
Yes.
He is in the capital of the Victorian Empire, and so his influence there in London is reaching the entire world, as his sermons are certainly being published in English and spread throughout the English-speaking world, but then being translated into other languages. There's something like 40 other languages that his sermons were translated into. He really had an amazing global impact throughout his ministry, from his books to his sermons to his pastor's college to the orphanage that he started, and certainly to his church there, the largest church in evangelicalism. It's a phenomenal story.
And again, I think a lot of people would love to have your job to read Charles Haddon Spurgeon, to be the curator of the Spurgeon Library. But what you've done here is given us sort of bite-sized readings, 30 different days, 30 chapters, of course, in addition to, of course, the introduction we just talked about. And talk about how to use these, because in some respects what you do is you give us a key verse that obviously was one he was preaching from, and then you take us through, in round numbers, about 3 or 4 pages, and give us kind of a summary of some of the key points that he gave in that particular message related to Christmas.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons his sermons were so popular was because Spurgeon was a gifted communicator, and he was he meditated on God's word richly, powerfully. So what we have here are 30 of his sermons, particularly around Christmas, as he is meditating on the incarnation, on the coming of Christ and how that affects our Christian lives. So these are not full sermons. His sermons obviously would be much longer, but I've tried to pick excerpts that are sort of self-contained and contain some of his richest reflections. In terms of the way to use them, I think these could be certainly used privately, in terms of your own personal devotions. But another option might be to find a good Christian friend that you meet with, and you read through these together and discuss them. Or perhaps, in the context of family worship or a small group, getting a group of Christians together to read these. But these are devotions, these are meditations to help you dwell on this wonderful fact that the eternal God has taken on our humanity. Right?
Yes.
Has come God with us, the Emmanuel, that amazing truth that we can be so familiar with and sometimes skip over quickly, but he helps us slow down and just dwell on that. So that's my hope for those who read this book.
Again, it's called A Wondrous Mystery. We'll take a break and come back with more. It is a relatively inexpensive book, and you might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if you simply go to our website, pointofview.net, click on that button that says See More and scroll down. You can get the book easily online by Kindle or a paperback, and I think you will appreciate that. And when we come back, I thought we'll just focus on one or two, and one in particular that we start out with, because the first mention, if you will, of the gospel is found, interesting enough, in Genesis 3, and where Christ will be the conqueror of Satan. Well, again, in this sermon, he takes you from Genesis 3 to then, when I just mentioned, Micah 5, and then to Isaiah 9. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because that is so helpful. And it also illustrates how this book could be put in the hands of a non-Christian if he or she is open. It really could be used in an evangelistic way. We'll talk more about that, but we need to take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after these important messages.
Point of View, finding clarity in the chaos.
The importance of supporting ministries like Point of View that speak the truth. We complain sometimes that we're not hearing the truth in pulpits around America. But when we have a radio show like Point of View that speaks the truth, that really lays out the issues from a biblical perspective, that gives you the ammunition as teachers of the word and disciple makers to go out there and engage the culture, These ministries, folks, are the ones we need to be supporting in this hour. And that's what y'all do every day, Kerby. And I just hope people will continue to support such a legacy ministry that has meant so much for this nation.
Finding clarity in the chaos. Point of View.
Buddy Pounds reminding you that, of course, it is Giving Tuesday, and if you can support Point of View, we'd certainly love to hear from you. Again, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. Of course, the phone number, which I gave before, I'll give it out again, 800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. If you'd like to give a call, and of course, we're talking about the Advent in this particular book, A Wondrous Mystery, and we're so privileged to have with us for a little bit longer Dr. Geoffrey Chang, who is the curator of the Spurgeon Library, Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, of course, an assistant professor of historical theology, and much, much more. Let's, we can get to one of the sections here, and it goes back to Genesis 3. Some people refer to that as the proto-evangelium, and that is the first emphasis of the gospel right there. As soon as the fall takes place, you see God's plan for salvation. But then in the sermon, Charles Spurgeon takes us through, first of all, the fact that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem, Micah 5, and then the very famous passage in Isaiah 9:6, for unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, the government will be upon his shoulder, his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. In some respects, he takes us through the entire gospel and brings us up to the birth of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what that really highlights right at the outset is that the birth of Christ is not a kind of plan B, things didn't work out with some other thing and God figures out something else to do, but rather the coming of Christ, the seed of the woman who would crush the head of the serpent. This was God's plan from the beginning, right? He had a Savior planned all along, and really all of Scripture from beginning to end points to the Savior, Jesus Christ, who would come.
One of the things I think is so helpful about this is, of course, this is deeply meaningful to us as a Christian, but in some respects, as I was going through the first couple of days, it almost parallels one of the booklets we make available to our listeners on messianic prophecy. When you see that these prophecies in the Old Testament literally fulfilled in Jesus, Geoffrey, I don't know how many people you know, but I certainly have run into a number, and I remember being even at National Religious Broadcasters a while back and having one of the people doing the interview say, really, to be honest with you, the reason I'm a Christian is in large part because I saw all these prophecies in the Old Testament and they were fulfilled in the person Jesus Christ. And I wondered what in the world would be the probability that that could happen by chance. And again, seeing fulfilled prophecy is just a fingerprint of God and also points to the fact that, as you said, Jesus wasn't plan B. Jesus was part of the Father in the creation, and Jesus shows up in the Old Testament, as we talked yesterday with one of our guests about the idea of theophany or Christophany in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
But all of that comes together, and in some respects, that's why I said, even though you intended this to be a book written primarily to Christians, I could see how we could give this to non-Christians and really get them thinking about the fact that Christ was predicted and he came and he fulfilled what God had planned for him to do here on earth.
Yeah, I think that's true. Especially for folks who are living in different parts of the country that are increasingly post-Christian. I previously served as a pastor in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, yes.
And we had many neighbors who had never had an evangelical Christian as a friend. So all they knew of Christianity was kind of what they saw in the news or in the papers. So they were very curious to actually learn more about what it is that Christians believed. And as we built friendships with them, we had opportunities to do that. I remember one of the members of my church had an opportunity to go into a local elementary school and just share about her traditions as a Christian in terms of how she celebrated Christmas. And so for those who are interested in learning more about Christianity, a book like this could be helpful.
Yeah, well,
and the message of Christmas ties so clearly with the gospel. So what
My
an
wife-
opportunity that is.
And again, my wife's from Oregon, and I go to Oregon every year to speak and teach and things of that nature. And Oregon and Vermont, we tend to go to those two states so often, and those are the least churched states in the country. So what a great opportunity. Well, just before we go, one of the other chapters is on the two advents of Christ. It is so interesting, Geoffrey, that oftentimes we sing, joy to the world, but really Isaac Watts wasn't talking about the first coming of Christ. He was talking about the second coming of Christ. And here, again, Charles Spurgeon reminds us that as much as we look at the babe in the manger, we need to look ahead to Christ as King of Kings. Can you speak to that?
No, that's exactly right. Whenever we sing the Christmas carols like O Come, Emmanuel, in many ways as Christians, that's also our prayer, right? The longing of our hearts to see the return of the King, to set all things right. Even as ancient Israel longed for their King to come, we also are awaiting our King to return. Christmas is a wonderful time to reflect on his second advent, when he will come to save his people, and set all things right. So I think Spurgeon points us in that direction. Even as we celebrate the coming of Christ, we know that his reign is not over, that his work is not done, that he has accomplished salvation, but he's coming back to save his people. And what a wonderful day that will be.
Well, again, this is Advent season. Of course, one of our staff here was making wreaths the other day and having wreaths and candles, whether it's reading this devotional piece, whether it's the preaching and teaching that happens from the pulpit of churches or even in the Sunday school class. These are all things that I think should be part of this season. And we're in the midst of Advent season, so I wanted to recommend this book. And it's the one that just has come out in the last couple of months, so it is new. You may be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, you can certainly go online. We have that link there as well. A Wondrous Mystery, a daily Advent devotion that has been edited by Dr. Geoffrey Chang, and it is the various messages of Charles Spurgeon, 30 days of Advent. And I appreciate the fact that you've done this work, Geoffrey, and so thank you for being with us here on Point of View. And I guess I should be the first to wish you a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. Thank you so much, Kerby.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into some other topics, and then we'll get back into issues in the news. But I think the topic that we've just addressed illustrates the fact that, yes, we talk about politics. Yes, we talk about science. We talk about government. We certainly talk about how to live the Christian life. We talk about things like psychology and the need for you to have a biblical point of view in every area of life. But also we believe that sometimes we want to delve into apologetics, theology, the Christian life, and those are all things that if you certainly value what we provide here at Point of View, I hope that you will maybe during the break think about giving us a call. Again, that number is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Of course, if you go to the website at pointofview.net, we have a banner. Today is Giving Tuesday. You have, of course, my viewpoints, commentary, some take action items, a video, and, of course, the links that you would need for this book and some of the other resources we've talked about today. When you support Point of View, you're supporting not just the radio program, but the full orb of media outreach that we want to equip you to make a greater and more significant impact in your life and in your community. Let's take a break. Give us a call, 800-347-5151.
Today is Giving Tuesday, and we would be honored to have you partner with us on this day of global generosity. Our goal is to raise $15,000 today, and to do that, we need your support. We do live in a chaotic world, and as the election results revealed, more and more Americans realize that they cannot trust the traditional voices in the mainstream media or the political parties like we used to. But Americans can trust Point of View, where we apply God's unshakable truth to the constantly changing chaos of the culture. Today, on Giving Tuesday, please partner with Point of View in a generous way and give more Americans the biblical clarity that we all need. Help us meet our goal. Visit us today online at pointofview.net. Or you can also give by picking up your phone and calling us toll-free at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I really appreciate your program. I don't get to listen to it every day because I have to work, but it's really a blessing to me and to all of us.
Everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
I just appreciate all you guys do. I mean, I learned so much, and it's amazing what you teach that I say to other people, and they look at me like, where did you hear that? So I appreciate you guys. So thank you for all you do.
I just turned your program on, and I want to just let you know how much I appreciate just getting the truth out.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about healthcare in Africa, and we'll talk more about how that can really fit into some of the themes that we've been talking about here at Point of View. Then we'll get back to some of the issues in the news. As a matter of fact, as we are talking about the need to support these ministries, don't forget that it is Giving Tuesday, and we give you an opportunity to be involved with us. And you can go to the website at pointofview.net and find out a little bit more. And I suspect some of you may have decided to go to the website or call during the break, and we'll give that number again in just a few minutes. But I wanted to see if we could now feature some of the work done of the African Mission Healthcare. We're going to talk about that with Mark Gerson. And Mark Gerson is an entrepreneur and author, philanthropist, graduate of Williams College and Yale Law School, really inspired to love the stranger, and partnered with a college friend and co-founder, Dr. John Fielder, to create this area of African Mission Healthcare, really life-saving care for the hurting and the forgotten. So, Mark, welcome to Point of View.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Let's, if we can, tell your story, because that, I think, is part of the reason I wanted to cover it. Not just the good work that you're doing in Africa, but it shows, again, the power of one or two to get together, have a vision, and really bring it to fruition. Can you share some of that with us?
Sure. So our AMH story originated really in the very early 2000s, when my closest friend from college, Dr. John Fielder, called, and he told me he had just graduated from the Johns Hopkins Medical School residency program. And he said to me, as you know, I'm a Christian. I said, yeah, of course I know. And he said, well, I feel called to serve those whom the book of Matthew refers to as the least among us. And in that case, it's those who were sick and dying of HIV/AIDS in Africa.
Yes.
So at that point, John decided to devote his life and his career as a physician towards serving the poor as a missionary doctor in Africa. And at around that time, I had started my first business, and so when he went to Africa, we would be in contact all the time, and he would tell me about what he was experiencing and witnessing on the ground, and I and a few of my friends began supporting his work. And then throughout the early 2000s, John stayed as a missionary physician in Africa, in Kenya, and serving in Malawi. And he was one of the earliest, and even as a young man, one of the most experienced HIV/AIDS doctors on the continent. Consequently, he was traveling through Africa to help administer HIV/AIDS care in various countries. And he said to me, I've learned that the biggest humanitarian problem in the world is the lack of access to almost any kind of health care for almost everybody in Africa. And the individuals who are doing the best work in serving the poor are Christian missionary doctors at Christian hospitals throughout Africa. And they, for a variety of reasons, have been effectively abandoned in the field. So we decided to start an organization called African Mission Healthcare, and we started it in 2010. And what we do is we provide clinical care to the poor, we do training, we build infrastructure, and we do hospital administration at Christian missionary hospitals throughout Africa.
And again, it was born out of your friendship, out of the crisis, as you mentioned,
Right.
the HIV. You can go to the website and see the picture of the two of you there. And again, I believe he still lives in Kenya and travels, of course, to Kenya
Right.
and Malawi and all that. And that, I think, illustrates again that oftentimes some of these faith-based organizations, these faith-based mission outreaches can do such a great job and an effective job. And that's, in some respects, one of the reasons why you are talking about this today, because this is a place where if people are going to pray for you or to donate to you or even maybe want to come alongside with you, that's where the greatest impact is really being felt today in the country and the continent of Africa.
Absolutely. I mean, my wife is a rabbi, and we're observant traditional Jews, and in all the different opportunities that we've considered philanthropically, the people doing the best work and delivering the most value and enabling the most help for the poor are Christian missionary physicians at Christian hospitals in Africa. And so we encourage everybody to express their generosity and their biblical values through partnering with us at African Mission Healthcare.
Let's begin talk about kind of one of your mission is talking about to strengthen mission hospitals, to help people in the greatest need. And you really want to hold yourselves and your partners accountable to transform those lives because, as you point out, we take for granted that if we have a sickness, a disease, maybe a disability, we get in a car and just drive down the street. And we get the kind of treatment that we would expect. But if you can, paint for us a picture of what it is actually entails for the things that you are working through African Mission Healthcare.
Well, Kerby, you set it up so well. I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, those of us in the West, we know that no matter what ails or injures us, whether it's need to give birth, whether it's being in an accident, whether it's some kind of illness, we can go to a hospital. And that hospital will be able to treat us and care for us regardless of what we have. Our vision for Africa is to empower these Christian hospitals throughout the continent to be able to provide the same kind of care for the African poor that we take for granted. And right now, if someone in Africa is sick or injured and they can't find their way to a mission hospital, they very often live with that illness until they die, or they live with that injury for a very long time, unrepaired, and have a significantly diminished life. I mean, significantly diminished to the point where we in the West can't even imagine it. But the people there who are doing the work to provide care for the poor are these Christian missionary doctors who, my wife, again, who's a rabbi, and I think they're the best people in the world.
Well, again, I want to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about how this has expanded because as I look through the list here, of course, we just mentioned Kenya. And this morning, my wife was with a friend that is from Kenya. And, of course, we have Tanzania. My daughter has been over there many times to drill water wells. But you have Liberia. One of my colleagues has been over there in Monrovia, Liberia. But you have Malawi, Burundi, Uganda, Ethiopia, and matter of fact, Sudan, and even South Sudan. So we're going to talk about that. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about the African Mission Healthcare, it has a website that we have already linked on our website, or you can type in africanmissionhealthcare.org, but you don't have to type all that in because we've given you the link. And it tells you a little bit about what they do, some of the impact. Many of the communities, we'll talk about that in just a minute, maybe even just get Mark to give us a couple of stories of what has actually taken place. And if this is something that you would want to support, certainly when we talk about ministering to the least of these, that is a topic we've addressed so many times here on Point of View. And there's some great stories we'll talk about here as well in terms of how this can really be the way in which we can serve other individuals. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the pillars of the teaching hospital, as well as just the whole healthcare crisis, which is going on right now in the sub-Saharan African continent. So we'll be talking about those issues as well. If you find yourself wanting to find out a little bit more about that, go to the website, pointofview.net, click on the link there to the African Mission Healthcare, and you can get all the information that you would want right there. And most importantly, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what you can do. But don't forget, we're in the midst of course, Giving Tuesday. So not only can you be giving to that ministry, I hope you'll consider giving to Point of View. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As we all know, the country is carrying a national debt of $36 trillion. The Bible warns us about debt. Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a servant to the lender." We need to do something rather than ignoring our debt problem. Senator Cynthia Lummis has proposed that the U.S. put together a Bitcoin strategic reserve. She has introduced the Bitcoin Act in the last session of Congress and will reintroduce it again in January. This next time, it may get a hearing because of the change in the U.S. Senate and the interest from the new Trump administration. Now, she proposes that the U.S. keep the Bitcoin that they have recovered and purchase approximately 200,000 Bitcoin a year. She predicts just by converting money we already have into Bitcoin and holding them for 20 years, if we do that with 5% of the Bitcoin that ever existed, which is roughly 1 million Bitcoin, we could cut our debt in half in 20 years. The other benefit, she explains, we would have an asset that's growing in value while our own dollar is decreasing in value. We could shore up the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. This, she believes, would help protect the country against inflation and protect the U.S. dollar worldwide. Her proposal will have its critics, as illustrated by one article with the title, "The Delusions Behind the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve." But the idea deserves an honest discussion and evaluation in Congress. And perhaps you've seen the graph that illustrates that it took 221 years to reach a national debt of $12 trillion, and then shows that we've added $12 trillion since 2020. We have a debt problem, and this is one way to address it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Point of View, finding clarity in the chaos.
Well, as I say, you were a partner with us from the very beginning, but if people do not understand what's going on beyond the secular news headlines, beyond what media is teaching us, people don't know how to make decisions about life. They don't know, they don't know how these things affect them in terms of choosing schools for their children. They don't know how these things affect them in terms of voting for people for public office. They don't know how this affects them in terms of all sorts of other issues relating to liberty, relating to justice in the lives of their friends. And so without point of view, how would people know these things?
Finding clarity in the chaos. Point of View.
Alan Sears reminding us once again of the importance of supporting Point of View. It is Giving Tuesday. And again, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. There's a banner there where you can give online. Of course, you can give us a call, 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Give you an update before the end of the program today, but we are privileged to have with us for a little bit longer Mark Gerson, and he is with African Mission Healthcare. And Mark, I thought for just a minute we would talk about the healthcare crisis in sub-Saharan Africa. We've already talked about the fact that, of course, we don't have hospitals, and so part of that is just the issue of healthcare infrastructure, but also just the number of infectious diseases. As I've had various colleagues travel to various parts of Africa, you're not just dealing with, as you said before, HIV and AIDS, but malaria, tuberculosis, and a whole series of infectious diseases that we wouldn't even even begin to think about in here, the Western world, but that is one of the kind of day-to-day experiences that people encounter there in Africa, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, there's infectious diseases. There's a huge problem with maternal child care, which is most women don't have access to really any dependable, consistent maternal child care, which includes getting a C-section when she needs it. And there's also an enormous surgical deficit in Africa with well over millions now, people who need surgery today and aren't getting it. But this is no reason to despair, because Christian missionary doctors at Christian hospitals are there. They're performing these surgeries. They're doing the maternal care. They're curing infectious diseases. And they have these institutions which are poised for growth, expansion, and serving more of the poor long into the future.
Let's, if we can, maybe talk about what you have actually contributed, because one of the things I've seen is that you have a podcast there that you and your wife, Erica, have put together. And really, it gets back to this idea of how can I love the stranger? It seems to me that we have many principles in the Old Testament about that. Of course, as you just pointed out a minute ago, your friend John points out to the book of Matthew in terms of loving the least of these. Just help us maybe kind of theologically for a minute think that through and how we can be the hands and feet that are going to make a difference in the lives of these individuals.
Yeah, well, the Bible tells us more than 36 times, which is an enormous amount in the Bible, to love the stranger. And love, as my friend Rabbi David Wolpe always says, is an enacted emotion. You can't love your wife and do nothing to show it. So you can't love anybody or anything and do nothing. So when the Bible tells us to love the stranger, we have to say, okay, how will I love the stranger? And the answer for my wife and I is through support of African Mission Healthcare. I mean, the thousands, tens of thousands of people whose care we enable will never know who we are. We'll never know where we live. We'll never know anything about us. And that's just fine, because the Bible tells us to love the stranger. So we think, how can we best discharge our biblical obligation to love the stranger? And the answer is so clear. It's through partnership with Christian missionary doctors at Christian hospitals in Africa through African Mission Healthcare.
Let's we can talk about when people give, what it goes to, because as I mentioned, there is a fairly long list of various countries where this occurs. But also, as I understand, you have teaching hospitals, because one of the goals, I think, for any kind of mission outreach is to provide the care and service, but eventually grow your own and have that to be kind of an indigenous project. Can you speak to that issue?
Yeah, that's so well put, Kerby. Yeah, exactly. So at all of the Christian hospitals with whom we partner, teaching and training are essential components, because our goal is to significantly increase the amount of care that Africans can receive in the present and to vastly amplify it into the future. And we do that through training. So one of the core tasks of the Christian missionary doctors is to train their young African colleagues. And we do that at pretty much every hospital where we work.
What about some of the stories? I'm sure you've heard some incredible success stories, and I'd love to maybe have you share one of those before I let you go.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's so many stories. I mean, I was just going over one last week with Dr. Bill Rhodes, who he and his family have been in rural Kenya for his whole career, and Bill's now in his 70s, and he performed a burn scar contracture release on a 41-year-old woman with a permanently flexed elbow. So this woman had gotten a burn and had an elbow that was permanently flexed, basically unusable. When did she get the burn? When she was 6 months old. So this woman had suffered with this permanently flexed elbow for 40 and a half years. Bill performed the surgery, cured her. The surgery cost less than $600. So for 4 decades, this woman not only suffered pain, disfigurement, and probably stigma, but she couldn't carry water or firewood, couldn't use a hoe or do any work, and now she can. So our goal is to enable people who have these kinds of injuries to get cured and fixed in the moment it happens, so that she doesn't have to wait 40 and a half years to get that surgery, which again is just under $600. We can help that person to live a normal life, God willing, when at 6 months old rather than at 41.
This we can maybe talk about how individuals can partner with you. I'm thinking, first of all, we may have a listener there that might think, you know, I want to go to medical school, or maybe I'm already in medical school and I just happen to listen to this and this program and everything, and maybe want to follow some of the work that John Fielder has done, or to do something similar, or maybe there's a church that would like to partner with you and send some of their doctors, dentists, nurses over to help out, or maybe they'd like to support you. What's available in terms of what individuals or even various churches or Christian organizations might be able to do to partner with you?
I think the most helpful thing an organization or an individual can do is to decide what they want to support. It could be surgery, it could be maternal child care, it could be infectious disease, it could be you determine. And then to send the funds to enable the Christian missionary doctors on the ground so that they can deploy them most effectively. I mean, when people say it's just money, there's no such thing as just money. As one of the doctors that we support, who is the only doctor serving around 2 million people in the Nuba Mountains, what he told me is, without the funds that you and other donors provide, we'd be working with Band-Aids. And so people who can open their hearts through opening their wallets are the genuine partners of these Christian missionary physicians who could not do the work without the money that I, my wife, and so many others donate.
So again, just a great opportunity for people to partner with you. Let me mention again that it's AfricanMissionHealthcare.org, and you can then find information about the impact, the community's stories of help. There's a contact button, and there's a donate button. And if you're looking for a way in which you can partner with some of the things that Mark and John and others are doing, you can simply go to our website or go directly to their website. And Mark, I appreciate you sharing this. It is a great vision that you two had, and I wanted to certainly try to expose it to our network and our radio audience. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, and God bless.
Let's see if we can take a break, and when we come back, we will get into some other issues in the news, a couple of articles that I've posted for you, as well as some other material that I think you're going to find helpful as we kind of get back into issues in the news. So again, if you found that some of this has been interesting to you, helpful to you, or there are some people that you would like to contact, we, of course, in the first hour, spent some time talking with Dr. Geoffrey Chang about his book, A Wondrous Mystery. If you'd like to know more about that book or order it, that's available on our website. If you'd like to know more about the African Mission Healthcare, that is certainly available as well. And we spent just a little bit of time talking about the pardons. We come back, very good piece, kind of curious piece by Douglas McKinnon on Trump, Lincoln, and the WHO. I'll explain that in just a few minutes. Also, the administrative state and what that might mean, and also the fact that Kash Patel has been designated as the new FBI director, and that has really caused a lot of people in the administrative state, including those in the Justice Department, a little bit of indigestion, to put it mildly, and there's some reasons for that. So we'll get into those details in just a few minutes. But again, don't forget that it is our Giving Tuesday, and we haven't heard a lot from too many of you. So as we go to a break, perfect time for you to make that phone call. It is 800-347-5151. Of course, you can also go to the banner on the website at pointofview.net. And I think we'll also get a little bit of an update. I think we'll talk with Jana Weidler in just a minute, get her perspective on what is happening, and we'll talk about all that right after these important messages.
Today is Giving Tuesday, and we would be honored to have you partner with us on this day of global generosity. Our goal is to raise $15,000 today, and to do that, we need your support. We do live in a chaotic world, and as the election results revealed, more and more Americans realize that they cannot trust the traditional voices in the mainstream media or the political parties like we used to. But Americans can trust Point of View, where we apply God's unshakable truth to the constantly changing chaos of the culture. Today, on Giving Tuesday, please partner with Point of View in a generous way and give more Americans the biblical clarity that we all need. Help us meet our goal. Visit us today online at pointofview.net Or you can also give by picking up your phone and calling us toll-free at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby. Kerby Anderson.
Back for a few more minutes today and last half hour of the program. And I thought for just a minute, since we were talking about the fact that today is Giving Tuesday, we checked in with the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly. Thought we'd check in now with the vice president of stewardship, Jana Weidler. And Jana, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Well, good afternoon, Kerby. It's good to be here.
Well, tell us how we're doing, and most importantly, I'd love to hear you talk to our listeners for a few minutes about why they should support Point of View.
Oh, Kerby, we could be doing better, and we are depending on our listeners to dig deep and step out in faith to give today. As we travel across the country, Kerby, you and I both hear people talk all the time about how important Point of View is to them, and the monthly booklets they get, the Outlook magazine. I mean, they're hearing biblical truth from tried and true people from Point of View that they trust. And I want to challenge everyone right now to think about how they can really make a partnership, develop a partnership with Point of View. We have a small budget, and we know that God multiplies. So right now, Kerby, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I truly believe in this ministry, and my husband and I just now pledged $250. And I want to encourage and challenge about 40 more people to meet that challenge today for Giving Tuesday so that we can make our goal. I don't expect anybody else to do something that I'm not going to do myself. So, yeah, $250. Right now.
Very good. You know, you mentioned we have a small budget. We also have a small staff, and there's one thing that you oftentimes mention, not only on the air, but when we go and meet with different individuals around the country, and that is what actually we do with a small number of staff and a very small budget. Can you speak to that?
I will. I'd be happy to. Kerby, you know we have 10 people on our staff. We have about $1 million budget. When you talk about other ministries, especially here in Colorado Springs, they have huge buildings. They've got huge parking lots. We do so much with so little. We are able to do the printing of the booklets. We are able to send out our monthly letters. When people call in and they say, you know, I really wanted to hear that message with that interview with Jack Graham, but I don't know how to gain access to it. So we have a very, very small staff, and they give from their heart, and they give their time and their energy. And it is always so encouraging when we set these goals for our budget that people acknowledge our hard work, and they do encourage us by financially supporting Point of View.
Well, again, you've put a marker down there, $250. Again, if you make that phone call, 800-347-5151, you might even be connected to Jana or someone else. And again, I wanted to just get an update, and we have a long way to go. So nothing else, I would encourage you, if you can take the time right now to go to the website or make a phone call, please do so. And we're going to get back into some of the issues in the news. So, Jana, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerby.
Let's, if we can, talk about a couple of other topics in the news. One of those articles by Douglas McKinnon, I loved it because it says that President-elect Trump channels Lincoln and the Who. Now, what's he talking about? Well, it turns out that, of course, Abraham Lincoln said you can forfeit all sorts of ideas, but then goes on to say something you've heard before, that you can fool all the people sometimes. You can even fool some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. And the point that he was making is this: there has been a real concern that sometimes people aren't getting the good information that they would expect. And Douglas McKinnon says that really what we have here, he calls it a Ponzi scheme, but whatever you want to call it, we have 5 major megaphones. One is the media. Another is the academy. A third is the entertainment field. The fourth is science. And the last one is medicine. And the reality he makes is that sometimes we've been fooled by those individuals. There are attempts to maybe hide some of the agenda behind some of these organizations. There has been a desire to not necessarily tell the truth. And he goes into the details about what is happening in the media, what happens with some of the public education nation today, what has happened in the academic realm, what has happened with some of these woke scientists and doctors and others. And as a result, the argument he was making is that Donald Trump kind of was well aware of that, and so began to think about how he could maybe bypass some of those channels of news and information that we all, I think, around the table here at Point of View recognize that are biased. And he says that one of the mistakes that oftentimes the left, and he says especially the far left, make is that they continually underestimate working class Americans' intelligence, resolve, and decency. And he says that's one of the flaws that cost him this election, because he says the American people, and most especially the working class, are intelligent. And, tens of thousands, maybe even tens of millions, he says, of Americans kind of step back from some of the misinformation and disinformation. It's interesting, they refer to some of the things that you and I take for granted as misinformation, and as a result began to look at that with a fresh set of eyes. And then he also points out that then candidate Donald Trump orchestrated what he says is one of the greatest communications end round in campaign history. He says, knowing that the left had a lock on the legacy media, on woke Hollywood and the failing academic world, he went straight to the American people by doing hundreds and hundreds of podcasts. And some of those podcasts were well known. That would be, for example, Joe Rogan and others, but also using what Elon Musk provided by buying X and allowing a lot more people to read material that before had been censored. And then he also did something else, he says, that many previous Republican candidates had never done, either were too afraid or too ignorant to do, and that is to take his message and vision for America straight into the blue states, the blue cities, and the blue constituencies. And so as a result, he says what has happened, and we'll talk about this after the break, is there's almost a real fear in the eyes of some of the individuals who have had control of the society for so long. Those would be people in the media, those especially people in the news media. Those would be people in the entertainment field. Those would be people even in certain political parties and others that actually are a little bit more concerned about the fact that people no longer trust them like they used to. And that brings him to the other comment, and that is The Who. If you are not familiar, the English rock band The Who wrote a piece called We Won't Get Fooled Again. Now, they released the song back in 1971. Of course, those of you, I think, don't they use that song on CSI and some other things as well? But nevertheless, he says 53 years later, the American people are saying, we won't get fooled again. And in some respects, that is an illustration of the campaign technology that was used, interestingly enough, not just by Donald Trump, but was actually recommended to him by his son, Barron Trump, who was recommending some of these podcasts that I'd never even heard of, or even some of our younger listeners maybe hadn't heard of, but were a way to reach new individuals. And I thought it was very striking that here he's talking about kind of bypassing the mainstream media, bypassing some of the woke Hollywood, bypassing some of the academia that would not even allow for an open and free discussion of ideas. And in some respects, that is a vision that goes all the way back to when Marlon Maddox started this program back in the 1970s, shortly after, by the way, The Who wrote their song, Won't Get Fooled Again. And for more than 50 years, as Warren Kelly reminded us just a minute ago, we have been providing an alternative to some of the mainstream media, an alternative to some of the sort of left of center type of teaching that takes place on college campuses, and giving you a perspective that you don't hear elsewhere. So in some respects, the connection between this election and even the request today for us to encourage you to support this ministry goes back to, do you value some of those alternative sources of media? And certainly one of those for more than 50 years, more than half a century, has been Point of View. And in addition to that have been some of those podcasts. It is amazing to me now more and more people listen to the podcasts than even listen to some of and watch some of the mainstream media. The so-called legacy media has become kind of a legacy, and it has been a real significant challenge, as illustrated not only by the election, but as illustrated by some of the positive things we've talked about here on Point of View. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Point of View, finding clarity in the chaos.
Hey, greetings everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West here, United States Army retired. And I think it's so important that we realize that there is a dedicated effort to make sure that this type of voice is not heard. This type of voice is censored. And what's another one of our rights that we have in the First Amendment? It's the freedom of speech. It's the freedom of expression. It's the freedom of the press. It's the right to petition our government for redress of grievances. And if we lose a platform like Point of View, what do we have? Where do we go? These are good people. This is an exceptional program. This is a needed and necessary program for us and the body of Christ. I mean, how much more do you need to see in our country to not understand that we have got to get this message out? and you're here to support a platform that is getting the message out. You're here to support a man and a ministry that's putting themselves out there. That is the essence of being strong and of good courage. So I'm telling you right now, break out your checkbook, break out your credit card, and support this ministry. Because if you don't, I'll find you and I'll make you do push-ups.
Finding clarity in the chaos. Point of View.
Colonel Allen West, who, of course, makes us smile every time with that quote, but also is an individual that has supported Point of View. You just heard Jana Weidler a minute ago say, look, I'm not going to ask you to do something I'm not going to do, and she has already put that challenge out of 40 people to actually join with her at $250 or any other variation that you might want to have. And, of course, I remember the very first time, this goes back to a studio before the one I'm in right now. That goes back many years, in which after he was on the program, pulled out his credit card and started looking for Warren Kelly, saying, okay, can I give right now? And so again, he's been a supporter, and we would encourage you to do the same. Let's have a can for just a minute. Since I was talking about the fear in the eyes of individuals, there has been such a reaction, maybe even an overreaction, but I'll let you judge that in just a minute, to the decision that was announced by President-elect Donald Trump to name Kash Patel as the new director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His full name is Kashyap Patel. He's Hindu. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But again, he's an individual that was announced to be the next director of the FBI. He's a lawyer, an investigator, and an individual that actually had worked in and had a pivotal role in uncovering the Russia hoax, and is an individual that also did a very good job, Donald Trump argues, in his endorsement of serving as the Chief of Staff of the Department of Defense, Deputy Director of National Intelligence, and Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council. You sometimes know how good a person might be by the people that are against him. And the other day, the fired FBI Acting Director Andrew McCabe was upset about that. I think James Comey was upset. And so those are the kind of people that you might imagine. But you might think, well, they were upset with him because he's the one, of course, broke the story about the Russia collusion story, which was contrived and not true. And he was working with Devin Nunes, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, to discover the black ops that the FBI and the CIA were running against Donald Trump and even against the American people during the back there in the 2016 election, then did it again in the 2020 election. So that might be enough for them to be against him. But Elon Musk came up with one more reason. He was with Tucker Carlson the other day and said that it may be the reason they're most fearful is the fact that this would allow the so-called Epstein files to be made public. Now, again, Jeffrey Epstein, you remember him. I think we could call him a pedophile or whatever you want to call him. And there was a question that was asked a while back of Kash Patel, who has the Jeffrey Epstein Black Book? And he said, well, the FBI, that's under the direct control of the director of the FBI, just like the manifesto of the Nashville school shooting. And, of course, we can talk about that in another one. And so Elon Musk said if Trump wins, the Epstein client list is going to become public because the new FBI director, Kash Patel, has promised to release it. And so there are some people that might be very concerned about that. And so that may be just another explanation for why there is such a pushback over some of those individuals that are being named to serve in some of these key spots in the cabinet under the future President Donald Trump. And that brings me to my last article that we've posted here by Roger Kimball, in which he talks about the administrative state. I remember Vivek Ramaswamy in his book that I've been reading talks about how it was so funny that a number of people told him not to talk about the administrative state. I think it was Charlie Kirk, for example, said people's eyes just glaze over when you talk about the administrative state. So then he started talking about the managerial class. Or, of course, a lot of people talk about the deep state or the swamp. But nevertheless, this is the a concern because one of the things Roger Kimball has spoken about is the administrative state. And he's had some people say, well, when you talk about the deep state or the administrative state, or you're talking about the administrative government, aren't you just talking about the government? And so that's where he was starting to realize, really maybe I need to make it clear that the administrative state, and this is his definition, is that quota of political power that covertly fills the vacuum left by the failure of the legislative branch to discharge its obligations. Because what happens is oftentimes the Congress passes a law and yet leaves open all the ways in which it might be implemented. So almost all the work gets done then by the administrative class, the bureaucrats, the unelected bureaucrats, who you cannot fire and you cannot drive out of office with an election. And so as a result, he points out that no longer are the people sovereign. And number two, the issue is that this administrative state just grows on its own. And he points out that it grows whether you have Republicans or Democrats in office. He says Republicans talk about limited government, but they still allow the government to get bigger. He says Democrats allow it, but don't even deal with what he calls the rhetorical foreplay in that regard. And so he says one thing that might change that is the Department of Government Efficiency, which is being overseen by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. They said they'll cut costs, and he says, well, I'd like to think so. Will they cut $2 trillion? He's really skeptical. I think he should be. But again, can they identify some ways in which we can begin to downsize government? And he says it's one thing to move from pen to scissors, and that's the $2 trillion question. But it is, I think, one of the big questions that's looming on the horizon. There's another reason why people are fearful of some of the things the Trump administration wants to bring, because they can come in and begin to cut some of these programs, reduce some of the spending, get rid of some of the duplication, begin to address some of the graft and corruption and kickbacks. And so we'll see whether that is going to take place. But I think it's illustrative of the fact that this is one of the great challenges. And as I was sharing, even off air with our guest yesterday, that we were talking about the fact that when I was in graduate school, I went to get a second graduate degree at Georgetown. When Ronald Reagan was coming in, there were a lot of people fearful of him cutting the government. He really didn't do very much, but that same kind of fear is now in Washington, D.C., and we'll see this time if they really are effective in being able to cut the size and scope of government. Well, that's all we have for today. Don't forget that it is Giving Tuesday. Even though we're going off the air, you can still give us a call, 800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. We will see you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Today is Giving Tuesday, and we would be honored to have you partner with us on this day of global generosity. Our goal is to raise $15,000 today. And to do that, we need your support. We do live in a chaotic world, and as the election results revealed, more and more Americans realize that they cannot trust the traditional voices in the mainstream media or the political parties like we used to. But Americans can trust Point of View, where we apply God's unshakable truth to the constantly changing chaos of the culture. Today, on Giving Tuesday, please partner with Point of View in a generous way and give more Americans the biblical clarity that we all need. Help us meet our goal. Visit us today online at pointofview.net. Or you can also give by picking up your phone and calling us toll-free at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.